Welcome to the Massive Change Show. I'm Justin Foster.
And I'm Dr. Virginia Lacayo. In each episode, we have conversation with leaders who are getting in some good trouble by challenging paradigms and shaking the system.
And after each conversation, the episode shifts to the second show, where Virginia and I chat about what we learned from the guest.
If you know of any leaders who will make a great guest, please introduce us.
And of course, if you enjoy the show, please like, share, and leave a review.
Thanks for listening.
In this episode of the Massive Change Show, I have a solo conversation with Jen Fry, a speaker, advisor, and now author on how to have tough conversations and deal with conflict in any setting. Enjoy the show. So here we are, Jen Fry. Welcome to the Massive Change Show.
Thank you, Justin. I'm excited.
Congratulations, first of all, that the day that we're recording this, August 1st, is two important dates. First of all, it's the launch of your first book, which we're going to talk a lot about here. So congratulations.
Thank you.
It's a big accomplishment. And it's also the 3-year birthday of Massive, the company I own with Virginia. Yeah.
Woohoo! We should have, I have birthday hats. I could put on my birthday hat for that.
Your book launch is the bigger deal. Also, it's the first solo hosting I'm doing. Virginia is not able to join today. So you're not going to get any of her awesomeness, and I will make no attempt to compensate for that. I'm just going to be a little bit more me. So you have a fascinating story, just how you got here, and just give us like the 2-minute highlight reel, the Jen Fry sizzle reel.
Oh, the sizzle reel. So I come from college athletics. I was a former college volleyball coach for about 15 years. I thought I would be one of those people that died as a coach for 80 years in the gym. And then it got to be a point where I started to study more about race in sport. And so I grew up in Arizona. I'm formerly undocumented. I grew up 5 minutes from the Mexican border. So probably at any point, 50% of my school would be undocumented. So we never had those type of conversations about race at all. My mom was white. We were just in a majority minority city. And I'm so lucky that I grew up that my head volleyball coach was a Black woman. My track coach was a Black man. My soccer coach was a Hispanic man. So I never had other problems with being the only one. And so I get to Elon, where I was at that time in 2014, and we had 300 Black students out of 6,000. Not student athletes, but 300, period. And I started to pay more attention to their experience, and I started to get more involved in this topic. And it got to be a point where I started to realize that I was going to have to make a choice, because at that point, my head coach, others weren't really interested as much in kind of this race conversation. I mean, it's funny to even think about that now, right? Like how sway, but in 2014, 13, like as a coach, we never had any type of diversity talks that I remember. And so I had to make a decision. And Justin, it's always easy to tell your friends you're going to quit. When you got to tell the paycheck, it's a different story. And so I remember coming to this point of saying, okay, November 1st, we're going to have our first meeting, and I'm either going to say I'm leaving or I'm staying, and I'm forgetting about this stuff. Like I was sitting there, and I remember in the meeting, our head coach would always kind of say at the end of the meeting, maybe like, anything for the good order or something like that. And I remember just sitting there, and it was like, this is the point. Either you jump or you don't. And you have to make this radical decision, kind of like the massive shift, the massive change. And so at the end of it, I just word vomit and say, I'm resigning. And we all look in shock. I'm as shocked as they are. Like, baby, we all shocked in that room. And I just said, I'm resigning at the end of the season. And it was a weight lifted off of me, because I knew at that point, I would rather be fearful of the unknown than resentful of staying where I was. I knew I'd rather do that. And I am so happy and proud of my mom, who allowed me to have that freedom. There wasn't well, what about this? What about that? It was like, okay, we just got to figure it out. And so I thought I'd work in like a cultural center. I traveled the world, and I went and worked at Duke. And then a month into working at Duke, Colin Kaepernick kneeled. And all of my friends were like, what do we do? How do we handle this? They had no skills about talking about it. They were like, well, if this happens, I'm going to get fired. My kids want to kneel, all these things. And I became the go-to person to help them with that. And
Hmm.
so I'm helping them. I'm Googling First Amendment private school, First Amendment public. I'm helping them with all this stuff, how to talk to their ADs, their donors. And then someone said, they're like, you should look at becoming a professional speaker. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like I look back, I had no clue that people got paid to be on stage. That wasn't even a reference of me. And so I was like,
Hmm.
okay, I'll try it. So I then set up my website and everything, because I was blogging before. I set up my website to look like what I thought was a speaker and put some prices up. And like I didn't know. And so I did that, and then just started kind of looking at it as a skill and tried to get in front of as many people as possible, because a lot of
Hmm.
people come to me and they're like, how do I become a speaker? And I'm like, and they're like, how do I get paid? Bro, you're not good, you suck. Like you speaking in front of your church audience is not the same thing as trying to figure out how to make 1,000 people stay involved. It's not the
Yeah.
same. And
Right.
so I had to develop a skill from it. And so I did that. I did a TED Talk. I went to Michigan State, got my PhD in sports geography. I started a tech company. And through it all, I still speak. And my sole goal is, how do I help people be better at conflict? Our mission is, we want to help 1 million people have a better relationship to conflict.
Wow. I love that. And it's interesting, just a couple of juxtapositions here. One of our prior guests, Janet Stovall,
Yeah.
we did an episode with her about the myth of meritocracy. And on that episode, we talked about, like, there's only two meritocracies really in the United States, and that is the military and sports.
Yes.
So I find it fascinating because I didn't know you at the time. And then we meet, and
Hmm.
you come from the sports world, and where it's like, as the saying goes, the tape doesn't lie. And
Yes.
I think the other thing too that strikes me is this conversation that you started having about race and conflict, in sports, and then it started to expand out into society. It is still seen even now as somewhat controversial,
Absolutely.
and I think the counterweight to, and I'm going to use this person I'm about to name as a archetype that is all that is wrong, is Tommy Tuberville, or
Hmm.
Tuberville, however you say his last name,
Yeah.
a former coach at Alabama and other
Yep.
places, goes to be a U.S. senator, appears to
A
get,
U.S. Like Justin, a
yes,
U.S. senator, a
yes,
senator, one
yes.
of
So
one of 50 senators. Let's
yes,
let's talk
one of
about that.
50, and this is a guy, SEC, T, and he didn't only coach at Auburn, but that's kind of what put him on the map.
Yes.
And obviously he had, I think he was Cam Newton's head coach, if I'm correct with that, at
I don't
Auburn.
remember. Yeah.
I can't remember, but I think that's true. No, nevertheless, here's a man that was, in and around black players and staff members and assistant coaches and everything, yet yet did not learn anything from that, and went on to be not only a U.S. senator, but one that is a contributor to the literal whitewashing of U.S. history,
Hmm.
and trying to go back and overturn the renaming of military bases from dead white
Hmm.
Confederate generals or whatever. And I just find that, like, that should be the controversy. That should be the
Hmm.
controversy, that you didn't learn diddly shit by being in and around people that could teach you a lot about diversity and conflict and things like that. But you did. And you saw this opportunity to be like, hey, I could take this out as a thing. And so I'm curious, kind of a transition question here is, when you first started speaking to, let's say, larger crowds, a little bit bigger
Hmm.
crowds, so maybe not like the early reps and early gigs at
Hmm.
Rotary clubs or whatever, but you started speaking to a little bit bigger crowds, maybe crowds that were predominantly white. What was the reaction from the audience?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say regarding Tuberville is, I think he's a prime example of proximity to race doesn't mean shit. Right?
Yes.
Because how many people are like, well, I have a black friend, I have a disabled friend, I have a gay friend. And so they
Yes.
use this idea of proximity
Yeah.
as their golden key to do, say, be whatever it is, because they've been around this person. And he's a prime example that even if you're proximal to people of diverse, oppressed, marginalized backgrounds, it still doesn't matter. Proximity
Hmm.
doesn't matter. A white woman married to a black man with black and brown kids, it doesn't matter. And I think that's the biggest thing, is when people try and tokenize a person that they know to make it acceptable of
Hmm.
what they say and do, all they're
Hmm.
doing is kind of literally puppeting this person to say, well, I because I know them, I can say whatever I want. So I
Hmm.
think that's like the first thing to acknowledge. That's why I tell people proximity doesn't matter. You can still be problematic even if you're proximal to someone.
Sure.
And I think the second thing, when you're talking about your question of talking to predominantly white audiences, I think the biggest thing that helped me out was understanding that you have to scaffold this information in. You can't come in here and be like, just the oppressed people. You can't. You have to figure
Hmm.
out, how do I scaffold it so that they can start to think of this in a more analytical way and educational way. And how do I
Mm.
not make them feel like they're the problem. And so for me, it was really about, how do I scaffold on personal learning so that then when we get to this point, that they're able to have these conversations in a more nuanced and understanding way. And so that's how
Yeah.
I do all my work with conflict, with everything, is that I have to scaffold it on so that people don't sit in shame or guilt, that they're able to start
Hmm.
thinking about themselves and, how do I start changing things, and not that I'm a bad person.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting too, is that people often think of conflict with someone else as a personality difference when it's
Yes.
really a values misalignment. And it's often because one person or the other has a more power. There's a different power dynamic. And so I think of myself as what I call a swam, a straight white American man, is that um, that I realize that yes, I may not be racist or whatever, and I have a strong sense of justice and all that, and I do I do benefit directly from systemic racism, and that's the thing that I love how you use the term scaffolding, because if you can't if you can't see someone else's perspective, or what I refer to as what Virginia and I refer to as systemic consciousness, if you can't understand the systems that they're operating in, you're going to have conflict, because it's like you're living in two different realities.
I don't know.
And
I would push back, because I think the thing of it is that life has conflict. Every
yeah.
aspect of it is conflict. And I think, yes, we can talk about the systems of it, but me growing up with parents who screamed at me all the time, and you growing
Hmm.
up with parents who were conflict avoidant, are still
Hmm.
going to cause us to have conflict. And
Sure, sure.
that can be, yes, we can talk about the systems aspect of it, but I think for me, I look about how we grew up and navigated the conflict, because that is going to have a big chokehold on how we even handle new information, how we
Right.
handle different information.
Yes. And I totally agree with you on the grander scope of conflict, which we're going to get to. I think in that moment, I was referring mostly to like racial tension, let's call it. Is that it's a there's you know there's no way I'm going to understand the Black experience or the Latino experience, but if I understand the systems that Black and brown people or women or queer people have to operate in, at least I can understand the systemic portion of it. So anyway, nerding out over all this stuff. Um, so, we have what I call our system shaker questions, and I'm going to use this as a kind of a loose framework to talk about your book,
Hmm.
because I think it's super interesting. I love the title, the look, the topic, everything. So, on a grand scale of where you're at now, you're a sought after speaker. You got a book out now. You're on an upward trajectory. And what do you think is currently your most dangerous idea? And I say
Uh,
dangerous
you know,
idea, the kind of idea that pisses off powerful people.
yeah, I think that it would probably be that they're the problem of why their culture is bad. And
Explain.
a lot of powerful people don't want to think of it that way. They want to say it's other things that are the problem, but when you are the leader, you are the person responsible for conflict. And if you don't do
Mm,
anything about conflict, then you're doing something about conflict. And how you manage conflict is a direct correlation to your culture. And so that's what people
Mm,
don't want to admit, is that when you're in charge and you don't handle conflict, you don't have hard conversations, you don't help people have hard conversations, you don't expect your supervisors or the people who manage employees to handle folks with dignity, if you don't expect that your managers are going to have really tough conversations with people, if you don't even allow um, there to be performance reviews from employees to employers, and all these
mm,
things, if you don't allow that, the problem when we talk about your culture is most likely going to be with you. Whenever I have sessions and coaches would be late, not pay attention, be on their computer, I could tell directly which teams are the problems. Like it
mm,
didn't take a genius to be like, I can tell that the teams that are a problem, that leave early, that don't pay attention, their coaches do the same thing. And a lot of people in power think that it's a do as I say, not as I do. But the thing
mm-hmm,
is that everyone's doing what you're doing. And just because you think, because you're in power, I could do this way, you are dripping what your culture's like. And I think a lot, and that's why for me, as a person that owns company, I try and be very thoughtful about how I navigate conflict, because it has a direct correlation to all other aspects. If I navigate it horribly, then I am showing people the way we're going to have a culture of conflict. And
mm,
then I started to question why people are always fighting, blind CCing on 1,000 people, always involving supervisors, like all of those things. Then it starts to be that it's a no brainer, because I'm allowing that stuff to happen. I am
mm,
giving, awards and bonuses to folks who aren't doing their job well, but the people who are working hard, we're not giving them anything but a pizza party, right? Like
mm.
I'm showing people what the culture is going to be, and I
Yeah.
can't get upset then when it's a direct correlation to what I've showed people.
Beautifully said. So, kind of a follow up to that, which is conflict resolution as a genre within, corporate thought leadership, for lack of a better term, is a big field. It's been around a long time. What are some mythologies or just bullshit about conflict that you think leaders need to unlearn? Like some things that, because you're told there's a body
Yeah.
of work out there, kind of an orthodoxy about what to do with conflict, and you have this very unique perspective from your background to go, no, that's bullshit. That's not the right. That's not true. This is the way it is. So, what are some of those things?
I think the idea of active listening is BS, because everyone is always like, you just have to be an active listener in conflict. Yeah. Well, if you're used to people screaming at you, you've never learned how to actively listen. If you've
Mm,
never been in a conversation with someone with your heart's beating, you feel like you're mad, you're frustrated, you're pissed off, you're hurt, and I have never learned how to actively listen to someone with my ears open at that point. How can I do it? Like, I think it's the sexy thing to say of, just actively listen. We've never literally been taught in the heat of the moment. And they'll do
mm,
kind of these examples like, okay, you know, um, there was one thing I did in this one class, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna listen to I'm gonna repeat the last word of what you say, and then do like a sentence on it. So
mm,
essentially, if you were to say the dog is red, I would be like, red's my favorite color. The whole point is I'm listening to you. But the problem
hmm
is that this is in a chill circumstance. Now let me try and hear what you're saying when I'm so mad at you, and I feel like my job's on the line, or I
hmm
am so hurt by what you've done. Now let's try that. And many times you can't. And so I think the problem is that we don't think about the context and circumstances that have to occur for someone to actually active listen. Like we don't think
Yeah.
about that. And so I'd say
Right.
that's probably one of the biggest ones, is a lot of conflict resolution. What we see being taught in corporate is like, okay, well, so we have to do active listening. Okay, when your job's on the line, how much are you actively listening? Or are you sitting there worried about your mortgage?
Yeah. Any others come to mind?
I think another one is that you start with kind of the survey of, many people are like, okay, well, we did this survey and you're conflict avoidant and you're aggressive. Many people know that they are. Many people know that they're conflict avoidant. Many people know that they're aggressive. you're not telling them anything new, and you potentially could be making them feel shame because now it's on
Mm.
paper. Now it's on paper that I am
Mm.
aggressive, and the rest of my team or staff, like, even though they know, but now it's out there. And so I just am concerned with those things versus how do we have the conversations and get people to start unpacking why they're doing that versus like, okay, it begins and ends with you doing this assessment to learn your what you do. Okay, yeah, I know I'm aggressive. I probably have some shame and guilt after the fact because that's how my parents were. I know I'm conflict avoidant because I'm
Mm.
ignoring 15 emails that are really hard to send out. And so I think
Yeah.
that it's kind of like, where is the starting point is maybe the thing I think needs to shift of where we have the conversation. And I don't know if it's starting with like that type of assessment.
Yeah. That really resonates with me. I would just add that first of all, conflict is usually not the problem; it's a symptom, and it's often, like you said, cultural. And I think a lot of the times people don't. There's a lot of emphasis on behavior and
Mhm.
behavior, and I'm a big fan of like cognitive behavior therapy, but that's not what most people think of conflict resolution. To your point about the why, they focus on the what. Like, don't
Mhm.
like you're aggressive or whatever. And I always think of the Ram Dass quote, we're all just walking each other home.
Mhm.
Like, and another guest that we had a number of months back taught me probably the most important lesson of 2025, which is to extend uh, most generous assumption or most generous interpretation. Yeah, in other words, don't take everything so personally, in that process. And um, anyway, so I want to just talk a little bit about some of the challenges. This is a shift here. The challenges that you have now related to, if you have any, but getting the word out about your message and this impact that you want to have in the world, or what are some things that feel like obstacles that they could be like, yeah, however you want to answer that, because everybody wants to talk about the big idea, and that's fun, and we should do that, and yes, have that in the big vision, but it's also like a long rocky road sometimes. So I'm really curious about like the hard shit that you're dealing with related to living out this calling that you have.
I would say the first thing probably is just the word conflict scares people. Just off the bat, the word
Mm.
conflict is scary. So I think that's the first thing about it. I think the second thing is that because the word is automatically scary for people, that when folks bring in a conflict speaker, they automatically think that there's a problem. So I think that
Mm.
that's the next thing. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Why are we bringing this
Yeah.
in? And everyone's guard is up.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think the next thing is probably that people don't look at this as proactive skills to learn. And
Oh, I
so,
see.
what would it look like if we could look at when you bring someone in? It's not reactive, but it's like we need to be proactively better at this skill because it's an effect. It's a effective communication aspect.
Mm.
And so, I
Mm.
think those would be the biggest things. Is that we're used to, there was a while when it was like with DEI stuff, it would only be brought in as a problem versus preparing people. And that's how it is with conflict is that people, when someone's brought in, it's like this big red flag that they're all scared about because, well, that must be the only reason. We cannot just have someone in here just to help us
Yeah.
out. And how do
Yeah.
we get people to reframe that these are skills you need to learn as a human, right? As a human that um, has the ability to engage in hard things because there's not going to be a time in your life when you don't have conflict. There's
That's
not
right.
going to be a time where, and I think there's kind of two lies to that. A, if there's conflict, then you're the problem, or that's the problem. So we have to eradicate conflict, and then we're going to live these happy lives. I think
Right.
it's a quote that Dr. Victoria Ferris, one of your former guests, tells is that the absence of conflict is not harmony. And so many
Yeah.
people believe that if I don't have conflict, it's going to be harmonious. So why would I bring in a speaker that's going to kind of light the dynamite when we don't have
Yeah.
conflict? But in
Yes.
reality, you do have conflict. You're just not willing to engage in it. It's under the rug people are frustrated, people are upset, they're just not saying it. And to
Yeah.
me, that's a more dangerous situation when people aren't saying stuff, because you're losing out on innovation, you're losing out on growth, you're losing out on
Right.
opportunity, because people are afraid to talk. Because then, if you bring up conflict, you're the bad person, and you're
Yes.
breaking the harmony, not everyone else.
Right. Yeah. And I've learned this in some couples coaching, and this idea of like repairing, and that conflict is
Hmm.
normal, and the idea that you have to learn how to fight, essentially, or
Yeah.
those are all things that are, I think, from a relationship standpoint, that transfers to corporate. And I remember Dr. Ferris saying that, and I created recently for a workshop I was doing, a spectrum. On one end was harmony, on the other end was toxicity. And I'd said that conflict is going to happen wherever you're at on the spectrum. It's just the difference is that when you're on the harmony end of the spectrum, which is about leadership and culture and knowing who you are and all those other things, emotional intelligence, social and emotional intelligence, conflict can become creative tension. It's when it drops below the median, then it goes into the toxicity, that conflict becomes like, it becomes toxic because it's moving closer to toxicity. So I love that I hear you and see that, like it's like like a plumber coming to the house. Why is there a plumber here? Is it something wrong? Is the toilet clogged? Is it thing? No, we're going to get better shower heads or whatever. It's like a
Hmm.
proactive thing. I love that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your book as part of like the third question about impact you want to make in the world.
Hmm.
And you said something at the beginning, and I'll ask you to repeat it, that your vision is that 1 million people will what? Can you say it again,
We
please?
Yeah, we want to help 1 million people have a better relationship with conflict.
Okay, so tell me how your book contributes to that vision.
Yeah, that's a great question. So today is August 1st, and I released my first book called I Said No: How to Have Backbone and Boundaries Without Being a Jerk. And so the way that it helps kind of go towards that number of 1 million people being better at conflict is that people have the hardest time saying no. They don't want to hurt feelings, they don't want to seem like the bad person. And all it does is, in some ways, engage more conflict. And how does that look? So, say for instance, Justin, you and I are going to go have dinner. And we've been playing this for a month, and you are driving in 2 hours to have dinner to me. I live in Baltimore, so you're driving in 2 hours to come have dinner. And I have known for 2 weeks I have not wanted to have dinner. I'm that it's Friday night. Today I have been exhausted. I've been traveling. I just don't want to do it. And
Hmm.
instead of 2 weeks ago being like, "Hey, Justin, I know that we have dinner planned on Friday. Can we just reschedule? I've just been exhausted and I can't do it." Instead, I don't tell you. And every single time I talk to you, you're like, "Jen, I am so excited to have dinner." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, me too." And I'm about to drive in, it's 2 hours. I know it's traffic on a Friday. Driving in from DC is probably gonna take me about 2.5 hours. But I'm so excited to have dinner. I'm like, yeah, yeah. And I know I do not want to have dinner with you because I'm exhausted. And it's not about justice, it's I am just so tired. And so two
Right.
weeks out, we're having the conversation. A week out, you're like, "I'm so excited. I picked this restaurant. Da, da, da. Yeah, 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 everything's good." And I'm not telling you, but I've known. And then the day comes, and you are an hour into your drive, and traffic has been backed up. You left work early, every aspect. And then you're an hour into your drive. And then I send you the text, "Hey, friend." What, Jen? "So I hate to say something, I have to reschedule." And that's it. So now, a point where I could have just 2 weeks ago told you, and you have happily rescheduled. You have been like, "Sure, let me know what day, let's plan, da da da." Now you're an hour into your drive. You left work early, you made a reservation, and now you are pissed off.
Hmm.
And that literally is a conflict that could have been 1000% avoided had you just had the courtesy to tell me beforehand. But because you have never had the skill training to do that, you wait and wait and wait. You think I think I'm saving Justin's feelings because I've waited. In reality, I've made Justin pissed off. And in some ways now he can't trust me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm like, yeah, let's reschedule in 2 weeks, Justin's like, well, fuck, last time I drove an hour and you told me then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's an aspect of my book, is to say, like, how do we have these conversations earlier and set boundaries and be okay with maybe in 2 weeks ago, Justin might be like, man, I was really looking forward to it. I'm kind of bummed. I get it, Justin. I get it. I was too, but I'm just exhausted. By the time you get here, I just
Mm-hmm.
don't think I'm going to be good company. I can take you being a little upset with me at that point
Yeah.
versus
Right.
now the upset you're going to be at me when you're an hour into your drive, and to turn around, baby, and come back to DC, it's going to take you
Mm-hmm.
2 hours because of
Right.
it's 4 o'clock on that beltway.
Right.
So now all these things could have been avoided had I just had the ability to have the conversation early on. And I had that happen where I was supposed to go to a friend's 40th birthday, and I was waiting, and probably 2 months out, I was like, I just can't go. And she was hurt. And I said, I understand. And when you're able to have the conversation, I would love to. I understand you're upset with me. And we were able to have beautiful conversations where maybe like a week before, she called and she was like, I appreciate you telling me. I just want to let you know. I'm still upset because I really wanted you to be there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different conversation. I understand that she's upset because she really wanted me to celebrate with her. And I love
Mm-hmm.
that my friends love me for that. And there was a
Mm-hmm.
level of respect that I was able to tell her 2 months out, not a week out. And so
Right.
those are the type of things when we talk about the relationship with conflict, is be able to have those conversations early on and not feel guilty about it, but know you're actually helping your friendship or relationship.
I think that's super interesting. Great story, great metaphor, because it's very relatable to everybody. John Mulaney, the comedian, says the only thing better than not going to something is canceling going to something. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a good feeling there
Mm-hmm.
sometimes because you're taking care of yourself. It's and but most people don't do that, like you said.
No.
And so it, what I think is interesting about your book too, again, back to there's lots of books on conflict
Mm-hmm.
resolution, yada yada, but you are approaching it through the lens of boundaries, and the saying no. I mean, the literal
Mm-hmm.
title. So it's a funny thing, that it's a funny way. I think it challenges the orthodoxy we were talking about earlier. And I don't know who said it. It could have been Brene Brown. It could have been Esther Perel. One of those two that said, "But you don't have boundaries to prevent a relationship. You have boundaries to protect a relationship."
Yeah.
And that's what but they said it through the lens of more like personal relationships. So
Yeah.
how that story, how do we translate that to the workplace where there's different dynamics? It's like your boss emails you at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night and says, I need the PowerPoint done, or whatever. Like, help the listeners, help me and the listeners, like, translate that idea of saying no and having boundaries when the playing field isn't so level, like in the workplace.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
welcome to
think
your
the
cat. For those that are watching on video, please introduce your cat.
Oh, I didn't realize this was video. This is Pickle.
Yeah.
Pickle
Uh-huh.
the cat, and I got him in December, and he
Oh.
is a complete menace, and he holds me hostage all the time,
Oh.
especially between 1 a.m. and 8 a.m., where I feel like the old Tom and Jerry commercial or cartoon where like they would clock in to fight.
Yeah.
Remember? And then they
Yes.
would clock out and be like, it's been a great day, buddy. That's what I feel like he does. At 1 a.m., he'll clock in to just wreak terror when I'm asleep. And at 8 a.m., he just curls up and is ready to go to bed. So he is an absolute menace.
Well,
Um,
welcome, Pickle. So
Welcome, Pickle.
Pickle needs to read your book.
Yes, he does, of
Yeah.
setting boundaries. Yes.
So
Yes.
how do you translate that saying no and that story, take that same lesson and translate it to a workplace situation?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Especially with a boss, with somebody
Yeah.
that has more like hierarchical power than you.
Yeah, I think it's great. Well, I think the first thing is that when a boss sets their boundaries, it gives you trust. So, for instance, when I worked at Duke, I had a business manager who I knew what was important to her and everything else wasn't. So, I knew that when we were doing events, what was really important to her was the lemonade. That and the iced tea. Those were the things that were so important to her, where I would go to the grocery store and I would literally FaceTime her to see which one she exactly wanted. That was
Mhm.
important. And I knew when she says, I don't care, that she didn't care. And I could trust that. And that's one of the things that I've had to work on. So if I give you, Justin, something, you say, okay, well, what thing matters? If I say I don't care, then I feel like I don't get to have an opinion. Because what I can't have is I tell you, you do this thing. I'm like, oh, I don't care. And then you bring it to me, and all of a sudden I care about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're having to redo everything. So I think from the supervisor part is that you are literally being transparent with what's important to you. If something where some people might think that you care about the lemonade, why would you care about a small thing? Who am I to judge what you care about? All I know is that I can trust you with what you're saying. And to me, that's the most important thing. So for me, that's a really important thing coming from the employee. Can I trust your word? And there have been times where I've been like, oh, it's fine. And then I get the final copy and I'm like, oh, I wish it was a different font. But you know what? No, I'm not saying that because I told you I didn't care. And so that's important. I think when it comes to being someone in in an employee role, it's that you're asking questions to set up those boundaries. And my chief of staff, Dawn, has done it beautifully. There will be something I'm like, oh, whenever you can get to me. She's like, no, Jen, when do you need it? Okay, I need to look at it by Friday at 5. Okay, cool. So now she's put parameters on me. And so a lot of people are afraid to put those parameters on because of the power dynamic, but you have to be able to do them to do your job. And so to ask, when do you want this? What date? What things are important to you? And some of it is kind of that coaching up, right? Where you have to kind of ask those questions because sometimes we have so much stuff on our plate. And at that point, it doesn't matter when you get it to me. But you as the employee have to know what is important to you with your day. And so how do you do that? Or there have been times where I'll message her about something and she's like, is this important to handle right now? And I might say, nope, it could be till tomorrow, or actually it is. And so you're asking the questions to get the parameters around it versus I send you something at 7:00 on Friday and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to get it done. And then I'm like, oh girl, that could have waited 2 days, but you didn't ask. Yeah. And you have one thing I always say is that you have to use your words. You have to use your words. So you can't then be upset and say, well, why didn't you tell me? Girl, just ask. Just ask, do you need it? And she'll ask that. And there might be times where she'll be like, I can't do it right now. And if it's that important to me, guess what Jen does? She does it.
You're right.
Because she's told me at this point, I can't, I have a full plate because I have project A, B, and C. Okay, so I get to decide, is it important enough for me to do it? Or is it not that important enough that it can wait? And so I think with people is to use their words so that they can get a better understanding of what's needed of them and what's expected of them. Or to say, I have these 5 things on my plate. What do you want me to take off?
Oh, yes. I love that.
And then I might be like, none of it. We'll figure out something else.
Yeah. This confirms a belief I've had for a good while that most conflict comes from what's not said, not what is said. It's the unspoken, which always gets filled. Whoever has the power dynamic in the relationship fills that void. So if they're an avoidant type person, they're like, you didn't say anything, you must be fine. Or they'll fill it with, if they're assholes, if they're abusive, they'll fill it with abuse. And that's why I think it's mandatory. I mean, courage is mandatory for dealing with conflict. Within the realm. I encourage, because it's scary to use your words, as you said, especially if you have social conditioning or past life trauma or something that said that that's dangerous to do. So, okay.
Well, so there's a quote that says, "Unexplained expectations are premeditated resentments."
Yeah, that's good.
Right? Unexplained expectations are premeditated resentments. If I am not telling you, but I have the expectation, well, now I'm resentful and pissed off, and I didn't use my words to explain what I needed from you. And so that's one of those things is that many people, especially women, are conditioned to not say what they want. They just stew in resentment. Well, you should know as my boss that I should, that I need to leave at 4:00 to pick up the kids. Baby, I ain't got kids. How am I supposed to know? I can't
Yeah,
even imagine that. And so people sit in resentment because they didn't use their words.
right. Which is a sort of upside down, if you will, a bit of narcissism that you're,
Hmm.
that it's that sense of where you can call it victimhood or whatever. But I
Yeah.
do think a lot of it is, like you said, it's more social conditioning than personality trait. Um, so last question about the book, because and I'll link to it. I really want people to read it. Is
Yes.
imagine that you're going to extract from your book a little brain pill that's going to go into the heads of, let's say, the Fortune 1000, every CEO in the Fortune 1000. Just use this as a market. What will transform them? What's in the brain pill that you're going to give them, the implant that's from the book, that will transform the way that they think about something, the way they see something, the way they do something related to boundaries, conflict, saying no, etc.
For them to start thinking, am I actually the problem?
Mm.
Because when you start asking if I'm the problem, if am I the problem that my C suite doesn't want to talk to me? Am I the
Hmm.
problem where when we get into the boardroom, everyone just always says yes? Am I the problem that our employees are leaving at 3 times the rate? Am I the problem that we don't really value paying them as much as they should be? So they're leaving all the time? Am I the problem that performance reviews is when everyone gets blown up and there's no other feedback circle, right? It's just at the performance review? Because is that what I do to my employees? Like, am I the problem? And I think when you start asking yourself, am I the problem when it comes to your culture, you start thinking in a different lens. And one of the things that I do whenever I speak is that I say to decenter your coworker and center yourself. Because when we talk
Mm.
about conflict, people will be like, Justin does that, Mary
Hmm.
does that, Sarah
Hmm.
does that. But then what you're doing is you're centering everyone else and you're not asking, how am I the problem? And what do I need to fix? And centering yourself in that. And so I think if more C suite were able to have the real conversation, am I the problem to what everything is going on? And then the next thing would be, do I actually have the guts and the courage to fix it? And many
Yeah.
don't.
Yes. Yeah, and I love that. And it's that ownership, radical accountability, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
And then it goes back to what you said earlier in the conversation about the culture is a reflection of your answer to that question. Like if you don't think you're the problem, but you are, it's going to show up in your culture. And Taco Tuesdays and allowing people to wear jeans isn't gonna isn't doesn't fucking matter at that point. It's all like surfacey. And I would
It's
also
easy.
add, yeah, it's easy, and it's easy because it feels like you did something. It's
Yes.
tokenism around conflict instead. And maybe this is or isn't in your book. Maybe it's just my opinion. But it's also, am I creating the conditions in the culture for people to use their words? Because that's an extension to me of being part of the problem. Because maybe the problem is people are afraid to tell me the truth.
Yeah.
So,
If I can't remember who I was talking to. Oh, I think I was talking to Allison Kern, who is, I can't think of where I think she's the AD at UC East Bay, and she's great. And she was talking about how, think about when a project is going on and how you'll have an employee that keeps coming up to ask you questions to get answers. And she said,
mhm.
she asked the question, what are the conditions I've created that you don't trust yourself?
Oh yes. Hmm.
What are the conditions I've created that you feel like you have to ask me everything? Not
Mm.
that you do, but what have I done? Because if you are in this situation where you feel like you have to come up to me every single time and get the check mark, what conditions have I created to create that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Great point. I said that was the last question, but this is the last question because I want to ask it. Is if we're looking at your book on a spectrum of uh, problem solving or skill building, where would you lean it towards? Is it awareness of the problem, or leans more towards skill building?
I think it
Because
does both
it's about
because
setting the mindset for the reader when they buy it.
yeah, you can't skill build if you don't know there's a problem.
Okay.
Like how do you build skills? How do I come from volleyball. How do
Hmm.
I become a better volleyball player if I'm not aware where I'm bad? You can't
Okay. Good point.
you can't build skills without knowing that there's a problem. And that's, to me, part of the problem is that folks are trying to build a house on a really unstable foundation.
Mm.
How are
Okay.
you trying to get better at conflict if you don't know where your problems are that you're bad at and where they came from? Because
Mm.
yes, you can say, okay, I'm conflict avoidant. But if you don't fully understand why you're conflict avoidant and how it shows up, then how can you actually skill build on top of it? And so part
Yeah.
of it is helping people see where the problems are occurring. And then the second part is how do they start building the skills to be better at it? To me, it both has to happen at the same time.
Well said. Great stopping point. I wish you tremendous success for the book, and your career and your message that you have. I think it's essential. I think you're cool. I think the world needs to know who you
Yay!
are, and maybe Pickles too. And
And
we'll
damn
talk
cat.
down the road.
Yes, I appreciate you, Justin. And my love
Appreciate
to
you too.
Victoria. We missed a great conversation.
Yes. Thank you.